My name is Elizabeth. I'm 36 years old. When I was at my absolute lowest, drowning in trauma after a life altering accident, my family didn't just turn their backs on me, they walked away. They left me to face it all alone. But this isn't a pity party. This is the story of what happened years later when they came knocking on my door and were met with the person I had become in their absence. This is the story of the day they froze. It all started with the screech of tires and that sickening crunch of metal. One second, I'm driving home on a rainy Tuesday night, thinking about dinner. The next, my world just explodes into shattering glass, airbags, and a pain so deep it felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. I was 24. The first few days in the hospital are a blur of morphine and hushed doctor talk. My parents and my older brother, Mark, were there. They brought flowers that wilted in the corner, their bright colors feeling like a sick joke against the sterile white of the room. They brought all the usual empty phrases. You'll get through this. You're strong. We're here for you. And at the time, I actually believed them. I clung to those words like a life raft. My new reality was grim: multiple fractures, a severe concussion, and a recovery that would be measured in months, maybe even years. The first crack in their supportive act appeared about a week in. The doctor sat us down and laid out the road ahead: multiple surgeries, months of painful physical therapy, the high chance of a permanent limp. He also mentioned the psychological toll, the PTSD, the depression, the anxiety. As he spoke, I could feel the temperature in the room just plummet. I saw my dad's jaw tighten. My mom started staring out the window away from me. And Mark, he just stared at his phone, scrolling. Their visits got shorter. "We're here for you" slowly morphed into "let us know if you need anything," which is just a polite way of saying don't call us. The excuses started rolling in. Dad's work was suddenly too demanding. Mom had a charity gala to organize. Mark was swamped. They were building a wall brick by brick, and I was on the other side. The day they left for good is burned into my memory. I'd just come out of my second surgery feeling weak, in constant pain, and haunted by nightmares of the crash. My mom stood at the foot of my bed, clutching her purse like a shield. My dad stood beside her with his arms crossed, his face a total blank. Mark didn't even bother to show up. "We need to talk," my mom said, her voice thin and brittle. She explained that my care was becoming a strain on their lives. My father then chimed in with zero warmth in his voice, saying I was an adult, and while the accident was unfortunate, they couldn't be expected to put their lives on hold forever. They talked about me like I was a bad investment that needed to be cut. I just stared at them, my brain struggling to catch up. "Mean a strain? I'm your daughter. I almost died." My father's face hardened. "And we are grateful you didn't, but you're a burden now. We have our own lives to live." A burden. That one word echoed in the silence of the room. It landed right in the center of my chest and just shattered everything. It confirmed the darkest fear I had, that I was too broken to be loved. That deep seated feeling that you are fundamentally unlovable is a core belief many people form when they experience abandonment. "So, what are you saying?" I whispered. "We've done all we can," my mother said, refusing to look at me. "The hospital has social workers. They'll help you figure it out." And with that, they turned and walked out. They didn't look back, they just left. I was alone with the beeping of the heart monitor, a sound that now felt like a countdown to a life of solitude. It wasn't just sadness, it was a rejection so profound it cut deeper than any surgeon's knife. I was 24, broken in a hospital bed, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. Those first few months were the darkest of my life. The physical pain was a beast, but the mental torment was worse. The word burden played on a constant loop in my head. I'd wake up from nightmares drenched in sweat. I felt worthless, discarded. The abandonment had triggered all the classic symptoms of trauma: an overwhelming fear of being alone, crippling insecurity, and an inability to trust anyone. The turning point wasn't some big dramatic movie moment. It was a physical therapist named Elena. She was tough, no nonsense, and saw right through me. During one awful session, I collapsed while trying to put weight on my leg and just started sobbing. I told her everything: the crash, the pain, and how my family just walked out. I expected pity. Instead, she just listened. When I finished, she looked me dead in the eye and said something that changed everything. What they did is about them, not you. Your worth isn't determined by their inability to see it. She recommended I talk to a therapist who specialized in trauma. I was hesitant, but I was so desperate I would have tried anything. My therapist introduced me to something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. She explained that it could help me identify and challenge the toxic stories I was telling myself. My core belief was I am an unlovable burden. Therapy was the slow, painful process of taking that belief apart, piece by piece. My recovery became my full time job. Physical therapy was my labor, and counseling was my education. I started a journal to untangle the knots in my head. I'd write down a negative thought, I'm a burden, and then I'd have to write down evidence against it. It felt ridiculous at first, but it slowly started to work. I was learning to separate what they did to me from who I was. As I got physically stronger, I set tiny goals. First, walk a lap around the hospital floor without crutches. Then walk out the front doors on my own 2 feet. Each little win was another brick in the foundation of my new life. After I was discharged, I moved into a small apartment, paid for with the accident settlement, money my family never once asked about. Loneliness was still there, but I learned to manage it. I focused on what I could control. I'd always loved landscape design, a hobby from my childhood. I couldn't do the heavy lifting anymore, but I could still design. I dove into books, online courses, and software, and started a tiny freelance business from my little apartment. The first year was a grind. Some days, the depression was a physical weight pinning me to the bed. But I kept going back to therapy, my journal, and my work. I learned how to set boundaries, not just with other people, but with myself, giving myself permission to rest, to grieve, and to celebrate how far I'd come. Slowly, my little business started to grow. My designs got noticed. I hired my first employee. 2 years after my family left me, I had a small, thriving company. 4 years later, I had a team of 10 and a reputation for creating beautiful, restorative gardens. I had built a new life and a new chosen family based on actual support and trust. The accident and the abandonment were no longer the things that defined me. They were just part of my story, the catalyst that forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. I wasn't the broken girl they threw away. I was a business owner, a survivor. I was whole, not in spite of my scars, but because of them. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, 7 years after they walked out of that hospital room. I was in my office, a bright space with a glass wall overlooking a garden my team and I had designed. It was my sanctuary. My assistant buzzed me. "There's a family here to see you," she said, sounding confused. "A Mr. and Mrs. Miller and a Mark Miller. They don't have an appointment." Miller. My blood ran cold for a second. I hadn't used that name in years. I'd legally changed my last name 3 years earlier, one final cut of the cord. My first instinct was to send them away. But then this strange calm washed over me. I wasn't that scared girl in the hospital bed anymore. I was curious. Send them in, I said. They walked in, and the change was jarring. My father looked older, his shoulders slumped. My mother's face was a road map of stress lines. And Mark, he just looked defeated, hiding behind them. Their eyes darted around my office with a weird mix of awe and resentment. They stopped in the middle of the room, staring at me like I was a ghost. The power dynamic had completely flipped. They were standing lost in my space. I was sitting, calm, behind a large desk I had paid for with my own money. Hello, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't get up. My mother found her voice first, forcing a smile. We weren't sure this was the right place. You've done well. It wasn't a compliment, it was disbelief. I have, I said simply. What can I do for you? My father stepped forward. He launched into a story about his business failing, bad investments, about losing their house. Mark had lost his job too. They were at the end of their rope. As he spoke, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even a little bit of revenge. It was like watching a movie about strangers. The emotional connection had been severed years ago. It seemed like whatever issues had led them to abandon me had finally circled back to their own doorstep. When he finished, the silence was heavy. They all looked at me with this desperate, hungry expectation. It was the same look I must have had in that hospital bed. You've been through so much, my mother said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We know we made mistakes. We were just overwhelmed, but you're strong. You landed on your feet. Family has to be there for each other. And that was it. The nerve, the appeal to a bond they had torched themselves. I leaned forward. The last time I saw you, I said, my voice quiet but firm, you told me I was a burden. You stood in my hospital room while I was terrified and broken, and you left because my recovery was an inconvenience. I let that hang in the air. I saw my mother flinch. My father went pale. You didn't call, you didn't write. You never even checked to see if I was alive. I continued. So you don't get to come here 7 years later when your lives have fallen apart and talk to me about family. That family died in that hospital room. And that's when they froze. The masks of desperation just fell away, replaced by pure shock. My mother's mouth was hanging open. My father looked like he'd been slapped. They were staring at a total stranger. The weak, dependent girl they left behind was gone. In her place was a woman who held all the power they once had over her. They were not prepared for calm. I can't help you, I said. It wasn't an apology. It was a fact. A boundary. The last one. My father sputtered. After everything we did for you growing up, this is how you repay us? I finally stood up. You didn't come here for repayment. You came here because you're out of options. My healing taught me the difference. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run. I turned and looked out at my garden, a symbol of the life I built from nothing. I heard them whispering, shuffling, and then the sound of my office door closing behind them. I didn't feel a triumphant rush of revenge. I just felt quiet, peaceful. That confrontation wasn't about punishing them. It was the final step in my own healing. It was about standing in my truth and honoring the person I fought so hard to become. Breaking a cycle of trauma isn't just about healing your own wounds. It's about refusing to play the game anymore. My family left me at my lowest, expecting me to stay there. Years later, they came back and froze, not just because of my success, but because they couldn't see their own reflection of weakness in me anymore. They saw stranger who had learned how to be her own hero. And in that moment, I was finally completely free. Thank you for listening to my story. If any of this resonated with you, or if you've had to deal with your own difficult family dynamics, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Sharing our stories is one of the most powerful ways we can remind each other that we're not alone and that healing really is possible.